Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're going to be making Grandma's cherry cheesecake. And we're going to start by making our cherry filling on the top. And this is a jar of cherries that I got at Aldi. And it's a little bigger. I normally use the Oregon cherries, either the red tart or the dark sweet. And you can combine them if you're making multiple cheesecakes. But what I do is strain out the juice into the pot and then we're going to thicken it. And then we'll add our cherries back in later. So once our juice is strained into our pot, we're going to thicken it. We're going to cook it on the stove and add 2 tablespoons of cornstarch and 2 tablespoons of sugar. And we'll put this on kind of a medium-low heat and keep it moving until it gets nice and thick. For one cheesecake, you'll need an equivalent of 1 can, which I believe is 15 ounces. And like I said, this jar was a little bit bigger. I forgot to look and see what the ounces were on the jar, but it was a little bit bigger and it was almost a little much for this cheesecake, but we made it work. So if you want to use those, you're more than welcome to. Now we start by making the cherry filling because basically we want to give it a chance to cool down just a little bit before we put it on top of the cheesecake. And it doesn't have to be completely cool. We just don't want it to be blazing hot like it just came right off of a burner. And you can see here it'll start to get kind of darker looking and maybe a little clearer looking than it was kind of cloudy before, and you'll know it's starting to get thick, and you definitely want to keep stirring it so it doesn't stick or scorch, and you can tell it really thickens up nicely like a cherry pie filling. And once it gets nice and thick, we will turn off the heat and we'll add our cherries back into it. Now, a modification to the recipe that I started doing that Grandma never did was I will add a 1/4 teaspoon of almond extract. Once I pull the cherries off of the heat, I'll add this because in my opinion, cherries and almond go beautifully together and it's seriously tasty. But if you have an extreme aversion to almond extract, you can definitely leave it out. So once we have our cherries prepared, we're going to just set them aside on the stove and they can hang out and just kind of cool down a little bit while we prepare the crust for our cheesecake. And we're going to need a deep dish pie pan for this cheesecake, and it needs to be sprayed with some kind of nonstick spray or oil. To make the crust, we're going to combine 2 tablespoons of softened butter, 1 egg, and a 1/3 cup of sugar. We're going to start combining this before we add the rest of the ingredients. Finally, we're going to add 1/2 cup of flour, 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. As I'm going back watching this, I think I forgot to add my vanilla extract, but it would taste much better if you add 1/2 tablespoon of milk and 1/2 tablespoon of vanilla extract. You'll want to mix this just until it's combined. You don't want to overwork your flour or you'll have a tough crust, and it'll be kind of like a pancake batter, waffle batter. And then we're going to spread it around on the bottom and kind of work it up on the sides. And it will not be perfect, I promise you, but that's okay. It'll all turn out delicious and it'll look perfect in the end. So don't stress too much about it. Just kind of want to make sure it's not too thick in one area or another, just kind of evenly distributed. Now for our filling, we're going to start with 8 ounces of softened cream cheese, like room temperature. And then we're going to add 1/2 cup of sugar. We're going to add 1/2 cup of sour cream. And we'll kind of mix this a little bit to kind of loosen it and whip it and get it a little lightened before we add the rest of our ingredients. We'll add 2 eggs. And once you add your eggs to your cheesecake filling, you don't want to whip it a bunch. You just want to whip it until it's combined, because if you whip eggs too much, it'll cause your cheesecake to crack. We're also going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and again, we're just going to whip it until it's combined. And then we're going to pour this over our crust. Once you've added all of your filling over your crust, we're going to bake this in a 350-degree oven for 30 minutes or until the middle is set up. It can have a little bit of jiggliness to it, but you want it to be pretty much firm. And then our sour cream topping that's going to go on top of the cherries. I always kind of eyeball this, but if I had to measure, it would be about 3/4 of a cup, maybe to a half a cup of sour cream. I do 2 tablespoons or a little heaping of sugar, and then I do 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And what this is, this will go on top of the cherries, and it's not meant to be overly sweet. It's a very lightly sweetened kind of vanilla sour cream flavor, and it just kind of complements everything and pulls everything together. So once your cheesecake comes out of the oven, you're going to add your cherries to the top. And you can see as I'm adding this that I just about ran out of room with my cherries and the filling. It just about wanted to overflow, but we made it work. We kind of forced it to stay put. If you're using the jar of cherries from Aldi, you may want to be mindful of this, that you may have to add the cherries and then drizzle the juice, and you may have to leave some of the juice behind. But if you're using the 15-ounce can of Oregon cherries, you shouldn't have any problem. It should all fit. Now from here, we're going to add our lightly sweetened sour cream mixture on top of the cherries, kind of dollop it around and then swirl it. It kind of gives it a marble effect. And then from there, once we get all of that done, we're going to place this back in our 350-degree oven and give it another maybe 5 minutes. And this will just kind of set your topping. After your additional 5 minutes, allow this to cool overnight, if at all possible, or at least for several hours in the refrigerator before serving. And this is definitely one of our family favorites, so I hope that you give this a try. Usually when I make this recipe, I double and triple to make multiple cheesecakes because it goes so fast. And as always, I appreciate each and every one of you being here and watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.